In today's world of social media and instant networking, events can shine the spotlight on someone and the world knows instantly. Accomplishments prior to this electronic age are often lost to history. Within this film, the Woburn Historical Society shines that spotlight on individuals and events from Woburn and celebrates their high times in the unique ways that they had an impact on the national scene. History, however, is not always about honor and glory, and sometimes we must accept the mantle of a tarnished reputation. In our concluding story, we offer the other side of the coin, and remember when Woburn was in the national spotlight for some very public hijinks. While Woburn may be considered a blue-collar town, the talent, success, and fame of a Woburn son would bring a great achievement to the movie screen.
Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow's headlines will be made here tonight. Around the world, this is news.
Once a year, television audiences across the world watch the Academy Awards, the Oscars, to see celebrities, view clips of recent blockbusters, and root for their favorite actor or actress. Oftentimes, the so-called lesser categories are ignored by the public, but the effort and talent of these winners usually contribute greatly to the success of a movie. This is especially true for the art director. It is the art director's responsibility to bring a script to visual life. It begins with storyboards, paintings, and moves on to props and furnishings. Costuming, construction, and set design are all guided by the watchful eye of the art director. And the dean of Hollywood art directors during Hollywood's golden age and beyond was Lyle R. Wheeler of Woburn, Massachusetts. Born in Woburn on February 12, 1905, Lyle Reynolds Wheeler lived with his family on Cleveland Avenue. While still a youth, he moved with his family to Long Beach, California, and attended the USC School of Architecture, where it was soon realized by classmates and others they were seeing a budding genius. After all, he received his first architectural commission at the age of 15. He began his career as a magazine illustrator and industrial designer before joining MGM Studios in 1931 as a layout artist. His talents were immediately evident, and he was soon promoted to assistant art director. His first film production as an art director came in 1936, working with David O. Selznick on the film The Garden of Allah, an early experiment in color. In 1937, he received his first Oscar nomination for Prisoner of Zenda, followed by The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in 1938. Wheeler seized this opportunity to show his skills working with the new filmmaking process of Technicolor. He applied the new Technicolor dye transfer process to its fullest advantage, giving the finished film sharper definition and enhanced richness of color. With his reputation at its zenith, he was called upon to create the stunning and colorful scenes of the epic. Gone with the Wind. It is well known that Wheeler worked for authenticity in his designs, amassing thousands of drawings, photographs, and descriptions of the southern locales which figured into the story. His art direction captured the magnificence of the South before the Civil War and the devastation during the war. His settings also accentuated the exquisite beauty of Vivian Leigh and Olivia de Havilland. His legacy was forever established in perhaps the two most magnificent scenes in movie history: the grandeur of Tara and the burning of Atlanta. He is quoted as saying, "I had to argue with Selznick about everything. I always won, too, at least in my own mind." For this masterpiece, he received the Academy Award for Art Direction in 1939.
And now let's get right to it. The awards of 1939. First, the technical awards, which will be presented by the chairman of the Research Council and winner of last year's Thalberg Award, Mr. Darrell Zanuck.
Mr. Zanuck deals out my glittering replicas in quick succession. To William Cameron Menzies for his outstanding use of color in Gone with the Wind. To Dr. Herbert T. Kalmus, president of Technicolor, a special Oscar for color development. To Hal Kern and James Newcomb for film editing, Gone with the Wind. To Ernest Haller, color cinematography, and the same to Ray Renahan, Gone with the Wind. To Bernard B. Brown, sound recording, When Tomorrow Comes. To Fred Serson for the special photographic effects, The Rains Came. To Lyle Wheeler for art direction, Gone with the Wind.
Wheeler's outstanding black and white films are all recognizable by sharp, clean lines, so crisp and real, you almost feel you're transported into the setting. Notable examples being Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca in 1940, with Sir Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. This year commemorates the 75th anniversary of this classic film. He would use this black and white art form in two of his other great films. Laura in 1944, with Gene Tierney and Dana Andrews, and in 1950 with Bette Davis in All About Eve. Of all his films, he said, he was the proudest of his work in 1945 on Anna and the King of Siam, which won him his second Academy Award. That was a black and white version. He would later recreate those sets for the color version in 1956. This one set to music as The King and I, with Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr. From 1944 to 1960, Wheeler was supervising art director at 20th Century Fox, where he was involved from standard screen fare to CinemaScope. He would receive Academy Award nominations for Leave Her to Heaven, Come to the Stable, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, My Cousin Rachel, Love is a Many Splendid Thing, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and Daddy Longlegs, to name a few. He would also receive a nomination for his work on the 1963 film, The Cardinal. In a career spanning 40 years, he worked on over 400 films and was nominated 29 times for an Academy Award in Art Direction, winning 5 times for Gone with the Wind, 1939, Anna and the King of Siam in 1946, The Robe in 1953, the first CinemaScope film. The King and I in 1956. And The Diary of Anne Frank in 1959, where the film required a set showing the confined quarters of a family in hiding from the Germans in World War II. He also worked in television on more than 200 TV segments, including the long-running series Perry Mason and Lassie. Known for his long association with David O. Selznick, Wheeler was also an artist and designer off the film set. He designed the Beverly Hills Post Office, the Hawthorne Elementary School in Beverly Hills, the decorative edifices of Hoover Dam, and numerous houses for his friends. Despite his successes, Lyle Wheeler suffered financial reverses in retirement due to bad investments and a failed theme park. In 1982, Wheeler and his wife Donna were forced to sell their house to cover debts, putting all of their belongings into storage, including his 5 Oscars. His debts continued to mount. So did the unpaid rent on the storage unit. Unaware that his possessions were to be auctioned off in 1986, he lost family pictures, sketches, scripts, and his Oscars for a bid of $175 for 11 boxes marked Wheeler. People ask me about the Oscars, he once said. I just said they were lost. I feel like they've been stolen, but I didn't want to say that. I just said they were lost. Through the kindness and generosity of a fan, William Kaiser of New York, who heard the story about the Oscars going into an auction, took $17,000, depleting his savings, and retrieved one of them. At a ceremony in 1989 at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, the site of the first Academy Awards ceremony in 1929, Kaiser reunited Wheeler with his 1959 Anne Frank Oscar. This legend of the golden age of Hollywood, now 84 years old, was brought to tears. The boy from Woburn, Massachusetts, Lyle R. Wheeler, who would go on to leave his footprint in Hollywood history, died in 1990 at the Motion Picture and Television Country House and Hospital of pneumonia.
The hard-working Irish immigrants who came to Woburn and left their footprint on our city is exemplified by the son of one of those immigrants who would dedicate his life to our veterans.
During the 1930s, social and political influences were bombarding the American scene. Many Americans were unsure of the course that this country should be taking. Beset by a depression and poverty bringing despair, consideration was given to isolationism, communism, and even fascism. Patriotism was fading. At the same time, the winds of war were blowing in Europe, and many Americans, still with fresh pains from World War I, were adamant that we must not enter a war in Europe. There were still too many wounded veterans from that war who were not receiving adequate care, suffering from physical and mental health issues. One veteran of World War I from Woburn, Massachusetts, had a keen awareness of these issues. His vision of the future was clear, and he would one day have a national pulpit to give voice to his passions. Daniel Joseph Doherty was born in Woburn in 1894. He was the oldest of Patrick and Mary Doherty's 6 children. To understand who Dan Doherty was, you need to know who Pat Doherty was. An immigrant from Ireland, he arrived in Woburn at 14 years old in 1883. He wasn't off the boat 4 days when he found a job in a tannery for $5 a week. Joining him on that first day was James D. Haggerty, who would go on to be the publisher of the Times. Pat would stay in the tannery until 1930. Haggerty would recall, Pat Doherty never had a wasted minute till the day he died that he didn't find something to do. Dan is a true son of Pat Doherty. He would get his first job at 8 years old when he became one of the first newsboys for James Haggerty in 1902. He would deliver 50 papers a day and travel 5 miles to do it. Haggerty would say, Dan never complained. He was a troubleshooter for me on deliveries. A hard-working student, he graduated from Woburn High School in 1912. Active in sports, he played in the baseball, football, and cross-country teams and captained the hockey team. He was a student of history and professed he always wanted to be mayor. He graduated from Burdett College in 1913 and became a bookkeeper in a Woburn tannery, where his father was working as the supervisor. In 1916, he also found time to represent Ward 3 in the city council. He was the city's youngest alderman ever to hold office. Dan was working in the tannery when the war broke out, so on September 25, 1917, he enlisted in the Navy. He rose to warrant officer, serving in the Pay Corps. After his active service at various ports on the East Coast, he remained on inactive duty as lieutenant commander in the Naval Reserve. During his time in the service, he had molded strong opinions on major issues facing America, and he would give those opinions a voice. Described by many as sincere, persistent, and genuinely religious, he didn't drink, smoke, or cuss. When asked by a friend, "What do you do for fun?" he replied, "I do what I want to do. I don't think any man can have fun except by doing what he wants to do." Following his naval service, he returned to Woburn. Daniel Doherty received his law degree from Suffolk Law School in 1922 and was admitted to the Massachusetts bar later that year. In 1923, he was admitted to the federal bar. While practicing law, he managed to attend Bentley School of Accounting and Finance at night and graduated. All the while, the fires were burning in his heart to halting the eroding patriotism in the country and combat the lack of attention being paid to thousands of wounded veterans from World War I. Soon he would take the first step in addressing those issues. The American Legion was founded by Theodore Roosevelt Jr. and chartered by Congress in 1919 as a patriotic veterans organization whose motto is, "For God and Country." It was becoming a force in social and political change in America, with an emphasis on providing veterans benefits. It was a perfect match. Daniel Doherty was determined to both corral patriotic fervor and crush all attempts to undermine American ideals and generate support for increased medical attention for veterans. Recognizing that the Legion's philosophy matched his own, Dan Doherty organized and became a charter member of George A. Campbell, Post Number 101 in Woburn in 1921. He served as its first adjutant. The post had been formed following World War I and named in honor of George A. Campbell, who died heroically in that war. On October 19, 1925, Daniel Doherty married Mary Elizabeth Linehan at St. Anne's Church in Manchester, New Hampshire, having met her 3 years earlier at Rye Beach. Together they settled in Woburn and made their home at 48 Bedford Road. Active in Legion activities at Post 101, he rose to post commander in 1930. Then in 1931, he was elected county commander of Middlesex County. The three threads to Doherty's career that fitted well together were his developing Legion activity, his growing law practice, and interest in politics. In 1933, he was elected Massachusetts State Commander. He became a member of the National War Orphan Committee, serving as chairman. In 1935, he would be appointed chairman of the National Rehabilitation Committee. Massachusetts Legionnaires believed this appointment was the first step in the buildup of Doherty as a leading candidate for national commander. His work on behalf of the physically and mentally disabled veterans brought him national attention. As chairman of the Rehabilitation Committee, he made extensive tours of the Veterans Administration facilities, asking probing and direct questions on behalf of the disabled. His research of these facilities convinced him the machinery in place did not respond sufficiently to the needs of the veterans, who they are supposed to serve. He was particularly harsh towards Washington, finding red tape hampered the efforts to aid ailing veterans. In September of 1937, Doherty would head to New York in advance of the Legion's 19th National Convention to push the campaign of the Doherty-minded to Legionnaires. It worked, and on September 24th, in a thundering last session, the American Legion elected 43-year-old Daniel J. Doherty of Woburn, Massachusetts, as national commander, the first New Englander and third Navy veteran to hold this office. He addressed the nation via radio and pledged his efforts to uphold the principles of the Legion and continue the fight for widows and orphans of World War I veterans. Immediately following his election, Commander Doherty headed for France at the invitation of the French government to tour the battlefields of World War I and pay tribute to our war dead. He would also join General John Pershing at the monument honoring the fallen heroes of Chateau-Thierry. This monument was established by the American Battle Commission, formed after World War I by General Pershing. Commander Doherty would speak at this dedication.
Mr. Daniel Doherty, the National Commander of the American Legion, delivers the introductory address.
We have assembled here today on soil made sacred by those who gave their lives that liberty might live. Although the purpose of our assembly is one of dedication, they who made the supreme sacrifice here have dedicated beyond our poor power to add or detract.
On his return to the United States from Europe, the Woburn leaders were planning a royal welcome for their favorite son. On November 8, 1937, over 100,000 people poured into Woburn for a spectacular celebration. A ceremony that had 15,000 Legionnaires from many states marching in 86 crack units before the reviewing stand on Woburn Common to honor the hometown boy. Commander Doherty and his family were overwhelmed by the outpouring. One of the highlights of the day came at the end of the 5-hour parade, when St. Rita's drill unit of Lowell and her 200 members played Danny Boy. Tears were seen on the faces of many Doherty family members. Dan Doherty was an outstanding public speaker. Rarely did he use notes when giving a speech. He also had an exceptional vocabulary and never at a loss for words. He would use this talent many times during his tenure as national commander to uphold the principles of the American Legion. Doherty was also not a passive commander. When he had to, he railed against the, quote, influences that threaten to undermine the foundation of free government, end quote. In fiery speeches delivered across the country, he reaffirmed the Legion's opposition to communism, fascism, Nazism, and all other alien isms, forces and organizations that seek to destroy the free institutions of our constitutional system. Doherty was fearless in his pursuit of what he considered unpatriotic Americans. In 1938, he spoke to an unfriendly audience at Columbia University, scolding them for becoming, quote, the Big Red University, end quote. To a chorus of boos, he stated, "The name of Columbia is besmirched from time to time when preachments containing un-American doctrines emanate from those who identify themselves with this institution." In the October 1938 issue of the American Legion magazine, Doherty penned an article entitled, "Educators are Propagandists." In a straightforward and unyielding position, he condemned those institutions of higher learning for teaching its students what to think, not how to think. He ends his article with the following sentence: "There is patriotism of peace as well as heroism of war." Doherty would be a tireless ambassador for the American Legion. He served from September 1937 to September of 1938. During this time, he would travel a total of 82,541 miles by ship, train, plane, and car. He visited all 50 states, supported over 11,600 Legion posts, and delivered hundreds of addresses. He would be recognized and honored again by his hometown when in February of 1938, the George A. Campbell Post 101 would make Dan Doherty the first life member of the post. Flanked by 250 comrades of the post, he received a solid Gold Life membership card. On May 19, 1938, National Commander Daniel J. Doherty would again be honored by his hometown in a unique and historic way. From May 15th to May 21st, American Airmail Week was celebrated across the country. Through the efforts of Woburn Postmaster Philip Gallagher, Woburn would be part of the festivities in two special ways. Woburn would have the distinction of being the only participating city in the country without an airport to participate in this event. Woburn's airmail would arrive on Horn Pond. In addition, a special stamp would be issued that honored Doherty as National Commander. The stamp was sponsored by the Woburn Lodge of Elks and designed by James Ward of Woburn. It showed the face of Doherty on a side of leather. All mail leaving or arriving that day would carry that stamp. A temporary post office was erected on the shores of Horn Pond by Foley Beach. Mailmen and mail trucks arrived from Waltham, Arlington, Lexington, Winchester, Wilmington, and of course Woburn, to deliver pouches containing over 10,000 letters. Each piece of mail would have a cancellation stamp showing a plane in the clouds and inscribed, quote, "First Amphibian Air Flight, Woburn, Mass," end quote. The plane arrived at noon and made a perfect landing on the pond. 20,000 people lined the shores to view this special event. After Postmaster Gallagher finished swearing in the pilot as a government employee, the crowd cheered as the plane took off. At the completion of his term as commander, Dan Doherty would go on to being appointed Assistant Attorney General in 1938 under Paul A. Dever. In 1941, he would be named the head of Massachusetts state bond sales, where the sale of defense stamps and bonds soared over the $100,000 mark in Boston during World War II. In 1947, Dan and his wife Mary would move to Winchester, where he continued his law practice. Then in 1966, he became the veterans agent for Winchester until his death in 1975. Daniel J. Doherty loved Woburn, and in his time put Woburn on the map. He truly followed in his father's footsteps, leading a life dedicated to hard work and family. When Dan accepted his gold membership badge from Post 101, he stated, I believe that a man's everyday personal life should be designed to give example and inspiration, and the fundamental thinking, life is to live the right way. Dan Doherty, thank you for all you did for our country's veterans.
Woburn prides itself on its sports teams, and who better to exhibit our accomplishments on the national scene than a quiet and successful woman?
During the Swedish emigration to the United States, approximately 1.3 million Swedes left Sweden. Following the lead of many of their Swedish countrymen in the late 19th century, Hans Andersen came to America for a better life in 1886, followed by his wife Ingrid and 4 children, Joseph, Axel, Marie, and Ida, in 1887. Hans was an accomplished stonemason who could not read or write, yet this family was part of the new migration from the Scandinavian countries that brought different cultures, languages, and religions to the Woburn landscape. Axel was 18 years old when he arrived with his mother and father and was just starting out in life, working different jobs like many immigrants in the tanneries and as a house painter. Axel soon married his wife Hilda, also a Swedish immigrant, and built a house at 71 Middle Street in 1890. They would raise 6 children in that home, currently occupied with their granddaughter, Roberta Lindquist, and her husband Edwin. In 1903, Axel Andersen purchased additional land on Middle Street and established a home farm as a florist, and soon embarked on a career raising flowers with his wife Hilda. Hilda became the driving force, and because of her success, they decided to expand the operation. Occupying 1.5 acres on Middle Street, 5 greenhouses were erected, and by 1913, they opened Andersen's Flower Shop at 14 Montvale Avenue. While growing flowers was the family business, their daughter Ruth was not interested in working in the family flower shop. She was a hairdresser by profession, and following in her mother's footsteps, was also an expert seamstress. While the establishment of flower conservatories in Woburn is well documented, the lesser-known industry of leather glove making arrived on the scene at the turn of the 20th century. The Bay State Glove Company operated a factory and showroom in the Tanner's Bank building. The McDonald and Wilker Company soon followed by locating in the Knight building. Both companies prided themselves on skilled labor and were early pioneers in employing women. Seeing the rapid growth of this industry in Woburn, she opened the Mishawum Leather Goods Company at her family's home at 71 Middle Street, originally selling leather billfolds, keychains, tobacco pouches, and gift sets. Ruth soon started making quality handcrafted gloves and purses for ladies, and other fine leather goods such as baseball gloves for the growing demand in the sporting world. Because of her talents, she secured a contract with Everlast and decided to open the Ruth L. Anderson Sporting Goods Company located at 17 Campbell Street in 1920. But one heavyweight occasion drew worldwide attention. Ruth Anderson would enter the world of professional boxing. Interest in boxing was at its peak during the 1920s. Boxers such as Jess Willard and Georges Carpentier were known throughout the world. But there were no better attractions, however, than Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney. Jack Dempsey, the Manassas Mauler, as he was known, became the heavyweight champion after defeating Jess Willard in 1919. A ring warrior, he defended his title 6 times in 7 years. While most fights were fought on smaller venues, George Tex Rickard was the first promoter to turn boxing into big business. And Dempsey's title defense against Gene Tunney the Fighting Marine, was to become the biggest gate of that period. The first match between these great pugilists was held on September 23, 1926, at Sesquicentennial Municipal Stadium in Philadelphia, and drew over 120,000 fans from across the country and radio fans from around the world. It was a blockbuster. It drew the largest paid attendance for a boxing event. That sensational record lasted for 67 years. Dempsey was a huge favorite to retain the title, but in a remarkable upset, Tunney defeated him by unanimous decision. One young woman in Woburn was listening intently to this fight on her radio. She was focusing, however, not on how the fight was progressing, but on how the gloves were withstanding the wear and tear from the giant arms of Dempsey and every sledgehammer drive of Tunney on the stitches that she had painstakingly sewn. The boxing gloves for this match for both fighters had been created by the nimble and experienced hands of Miss Ruth Anderson of the R.L. Anderson Sporting Goods Company of Woburn, Massachusetts. The many Woburn fans listening to the fight that night probably had no idea that the gloves were made and shipped from the plant on Campbell Street and made by one of Woburn's own. A young woman who had never seen a fight confidently made the gloves to detailed specifications of their hands and each finger. The gloves were 6 ounce, made from selected California Napa sheepskin. She even had special instructions that the hair padding at the knuckles be contained in a special cheesecloth sack so that the padding would not pull away. She made them under contract to the Everlast Sporting Goods Company, suppliers of boxing equipment worldwide. The gloves for both fighters were delivered to Tex Rickard, the fight promoter. Everlast supplied agents for all the professional fight clubs in the country at this time. Miss Anderson had made many boxing gloves for these fighters in the past and had made over 30 pairs of gloves used by Dempsey in his training for this particular fight. In the past, she had made similar boxing gloves for Gene Tunney, who gifted them to Mayor Jimmy Walker of New York in appreciation of the mayor's efforts on behalf of boxing in New York. Miss Anderson was instructed to inscribe the gloves in gold letters that read, "To our next mayor, Jimmy Walker, who elevated and made boxing possible. Gratefully, Gene Tunney." President Calvin Coolidge, a boxing aficionado, was also gifted a pair of Anderson-made gloves by Mickey Walker, welterweight champion in 1924. Boxing gloves were also coveted and prized on an international level. England's Prince of Wales and future King, Edward VIII, was a well-known bon vivant, accomplished horseman, and adept boxer. He was given a gift of boxing gloves made by Ruth by his trainer, George Mason, who had gloves made to specifications fit for a king. They were presented to the prince aboard the royal yacht, the HMS Berengaria. In 1927, Ruth Anderson's unique and famous boxing gloves would once again take center stage. The Dempsey-Tunney rematch was held at Soldiers Field in Chicago on September 22nd, and her gloves were requested by both fighters. This time, Tunney was favored, and he delivered with an overwhelming unanimous decision. The fight, however, was not without its controversy. In the 7th round, Dempsey knocked Tunney to the canvas, and it appeared that Tunney could not recover before the referee's count to 10. But the count was delayed. A new boxing rule had been established that required boxers to go to a neutral corner before the referee could begin the count. Was there a delay by Dempsey to go to a neutral corner? Did the referee delay in starting the count? You be the judge.
Now, watch that sequence again in freeze action with a stopwatch on the knockdown. Tunney has just hit the canvas, and we start the watch at 0. Jack has forgotten the new rule. The count does not begin until he gets to a neutral corner. Instinctively, Dempsey stays nearby. 5 seconds have elapsed before referee Barry is ready to begin the count. Gene looks hurt, dazed as the count begins. But here at the official count of 4, when 9 seconds have actually elapsed, he is looking at the referee and picks up the numbers. You be the judge. Could Tunney have risen at this point? At the referee's count of 9, but after 14 seconds have elapsed, Gene is getting off the canvas. Then, unabashedly, he gets on a bicycle to stay away from the rampaging Dempsey.
Tunney recovered and went on to win by unanimous decision, losing only the 7th round. This championship battle will forever be remembered as the long count fight. Ruth enjoyed the distinction as glovemaker to 2 of the boxing world's biggest gladiators, but her only concern at the time was that her craftsmanship served both boxers well. In 1930, Ruth Anderson would eventually move away from the glove-making business and start her own beauty shop. She would soon meet fellow Woburnite Leo E. Jack Flynn, whom she would marry in 1931. His career would take them to Maine, and there she lived for over 60 years until she died in June of 1993 at the age of 95. As a final tribute to Ruth Anderson's expertise and unique role in boxing history, the gloves worn by Gene Tunney in the long count fight were donated to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History by Tunney's sons Jay and John, who was a former U.S. Senator from California.
What can only be explained in simple terms, Woburn, at one time in 1917, had a sizzling and racy past, and now a confession will be good for the soul.
As the 20th century moved into its second decade, the nation was readying for the Roaring Twenties. This was especially true for the entertainment industry. While burlesque and vaudeville were flourishing, their days were numbered because the era of the movie was about to emerge. Movies' impact was immediate. Beginning with silent films, a fantasy state was created, and Hollywood, California was its capital. The allure was magnetic, and the early movie makers quickly recognized its enormous potential. In Boston, Massachusetts, meanwhile, a different type of public spectacle was emerging, the era of the Irish politician. Just as exciting and definitely as entertaining, Boston politics was rough and tumble. The Boston Brahmins had controlled the political arena for years, but a new rogues gallery was emerging to wrest their power away. New political names were demanding and receiving attention. James Michael Curley, the mayor of the poor, John F. Fitzgerald, Honey Fitz, and Joseph P. Kennedy were new to the political landscape, but they learned the ropes quickly, much to the chagrin of the Brahmins. During this same period, Woburn was ever-changing. While the landscape was mostly farmland, tanneries were a major industry, but quiet, country living was still available. Part of this serenity and nestled in the gentle woodlands of northeast Woburn stood the majestic Mishawum Manor, built in 1790. The longtime homestead of the well-respected Wiswall family, it is shown here in 1897 when it was the residence of Alvah Wiswall. It was a stately mansion overlooking Mishawum Pond along the Aberjona River. For many years it was a house to be envied, but as the 20th century dawned, it became a house of shame. With ownership no longer with the Wiswall family, it would eventually fall into disrepair and eventually disrespect. In 1913, the vast property along the Aberdeen River, including the manor, was purchased by the Mishawum Land and Construction Company. The manor with its 22 rooms was completely refurbished. Electric lights were installed in every room. Changes were made throughout the edifice to accommodate plans for a first-class automobile inn that would be second to none. In 1916, Ethel Greeley of North Reading appeared before the City Council and petitioned for a license to operate a tea house at the manor for the automobile traveling public. The remainder of the 200-acre site was divided into house lots and marketed by the Leppingwell Land Company of Boston. The proposed plan was met with excitement in Woburn, but the plans never reached fruition, and the manor house soon became a boarding house. This once proud edifice would soon become the site of an unpleasant and unsavory part of Woburn history. The diverse worlds of Hollywood glamour, Boston political chicanery, and public debauchery at a Woburn mansion would meet headlong on March 6, 1917, when Hollywood came to Woburn. In 1917, the era of silent movies was in full swing. Through his Keystone Productions, director Max Sennett had ascended the throne as the king of comedy. His formula for success included beautiful actresses, well-known comedians, wild slapstick chases, and bumbling police, the classic Keystone Cops. He directed hundreds of movies with a number of successful comedians, including Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd. In 1913, a veteran of vaudeville, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, joined the production company. He became an instant hit and soon was a favorite of the Hollywood tabloids. His popularity with the press, however, would one day play a part in his undoing as a prominent feature actor. Much of his popularity with the press, unfortunately, was due to his private exploits. His partying antics had become legendary. While the entrance of the Irish to Boston mayoral and city council politics is well documented, Irish influence also permeated throughout other political offices in Suffolk County. Perhaps the most colorful and outlandish of them all may have been Dapper Dan, Daniel H. Coakley. He would become known as the most corrupt politician in America. Without the benefit of law school, he passed the bar exam and opened a law firm with his brother. A supporter of Honey Fitz, he was rewarded with the patronage-heavy post of Park Commissioner. When James Michael Curley defeated his friend Honey Fitz in 1913, he resigned. Within a year, Curley recognized the value of Coakley's political expertise and made him a trustee of the Boston Public Library. He also became Curley's personal lawyer and fixer. Coakley had been the campaign manager for Suffolk County District Attorney William Pelletier. Along with his longtime friend, Middlesex County District Attorney William Corcoran, the three became a formidable force. It became commonplace knowledge that these district attorneys could be reasonable in criminal cases if approached by Coakley. Needless to say, his law practice was booming, and he earned his nickname, the Knave of Boston. The corrupt Boston political scene would soon collide violently with the glamorous but morally corrupt silent film world. The collision would occur in the quiet suburb of Woburn, Massachusetts. The Mishawum Manor's tainted reputation was earned long before 1917. The luxurious automobile inn never materialized, and the manor became a boarding house in 1916. For years, the local newspapers of the day railed against the illegal and immoral activities happening within its domain. Mayor Wilford D. Gray attempted to close the boarding house on several occasions. Woburn Police Chief McDermott conducted numerous raids on the facility and arrested offenders on a regular basis. Court fines were considered merely the price of doing business. Its popularity never ceased, and these raids only proved to be minor distraction to the owners. The most notorious of these felons was a woman named Lillian A. Kingston, better known as alias Stella Brownie Kennedy, alias Helen Morse, and alias Lily Dale. She was the madam of the establishment. Nothing seemed to work. An incident of major proportions was needed to finally close down the operations. That incident began on the night of March 6, 1917. Before the epic events unfolded, the night began innocently enough. Fatty Arbuckle, a rising star at Paramount, was in Boston being honored at a dinner, along with his wife Minta, at the swank Boston Copley Hotel on the night of March 6, 1917. It was organized by three of Hollywood's most important movie moguls of the day, Adolph Zukor, Jesse Lasky, and Hiram Abrams, the architects of Paramount Pictures in 1912. Abrams had arranged a late-night chicken and champagne party for 15 of the partygoers. He felt it necessary to continue the festivities at another location. Fatty Arbuckle did not join them. They chose the Mishawum Manor in a secluded, wooded area in East Woburn, Massachusetts. To ensure that the partygoers could satisfy their salacious needs, Abrams placed a telephone call to Brownie. She assured him that all would be ready for the party. Brownie ensured that all of the revelers would be satisfied with the proposed entertainment for the evening by filling the manor with champagne and girls of all ages. According to Miss Sears, the piano player for the evening, a giant tray was wheeled out with a clamshell cover on top of a silver tray. "Gentlemen," Hiram Abrams is alleged to have said to the guests, "I bring you tonight's specialty, pleasant under glass." Out popped a young woman, wearing only a few small pieces of parsley and a sprinkling of salad dressing, while 14 other young women, wearing only their inviting smiles, mingled with the guests. While the party was in full swing around 1 a.m., a blinding flash was observed in the room. Some of the guests became frazzled and left. While no camera was found, others continued the festivities, not leaving until daylight. Abrams paid Madame Brownie $1,050 for 52 bottles of champagne and Brownie's services. A good time was had by all, but they would eventually end up paying much more for their party. A few days later, the manor was raided again. As usual, Brownie Kennedy was arrested and arraigned. This time, however, the police also raided her home and confiscated her little red book. On May 9, 1917, one Lillian Kingston, known as Brownie Kennedy, and proprietor of the manor, was tried in Woburn Court with 2 complaints against her: keeping a liquor nuisance and keeping a house of ill fame. She was found guilty on both complaints and sentenced to pay a fine of $100 and serve a term of 6 months' imprisonment at the House of Correction. Both complaints were appealed by her attorney, former Middlesex County District Attorney William Corcoran. The chief witnesses were Teresa Sears, the piano player, and Bessie McDonald, a waitress, both employees at the manor. The witnesses gave testimony as to what happened on March 7th with the movie men. 2 months later in July, Abrams received a call from his good friend, Mayor Curley, who warned him that trouble was brewing regarding the party at Mishawum Manor, and that he and the other Paramount chiefs should return to Boston. Upon their arrival, it was suggested by Curley that they retain counsel, and he suggested his good friend, attorney Daniel Coakley. It seems the husbands of some of the women that were at the party on March 7th intended to bring proceedings against the movie men for alienation of affection by their wives. Coakley was promptly hired and given a retainer of $10,000, and the Badger game began. Coakley quickly arranged a meeting with Middlesex District Attorney Nathan Tufts and his clients Abrams, Zucker, and Lasky. Tufts threatened the men with morals charges. He lambasted them and said they besmirched the reputation of an upright Boston suburb town, Woburn. He even went so far as to call Abrams and his associates licentious Jews. The Hollywood moguls had a potentially explosive situation on their hands. It has to be mentioned that in 1917, the movie business was in its infancy. A large portion of the public were already boycotting movies for being scandalous and indecent. The film business for Wall Street was also looking very risky, and there were anti-Semitic feelings in the country. So when District Attorney Tufts suggested that the complaining husbands may be persuaded to drop their suits, and in so doing, he would not bring criminal charges, Daniel Coakley quickly estimated that $100,000 would silence the husbands and be enough to cover his own fees. So in an effort to stop any publicity that would bring embarrassment and public humiliation, Zucker, Abrams, and Lasky paid the money. For a sexual shakedown, the case vanished. This escapade cost Abrams his job at Paramount, as Zucker fired him soon afterwards. The Mishawum mess would again come into the public eye when in 1921, a petition for the removal of Nathan Tufts, District Attorney of Middlesex County, was filed by Attorney General J. Weston Allen, who alleges, among other things, that Tufts was involved in the conspiracy to extort the movie moguls out of $100,000. He would be found guilty for willful misconduct. The judge would call the events that night at the Mishawum Manor a stench in the nostrils of decency. It should also be noted that the Attorney General made it clear that he was in possession of Brownie's Little Red Book, confiscated in the raid of her home in 1917. While information from the book was never introduced, its presence ensured honest testimony. Attorney Daniel H. Coakley, Dapper Dan, would eventually be disbarred for his many questionable activities and shakedowns. As to the whereabouts of one Brownie Kennedy, it seems she moved on to Cambridge and Brookline in 1918, made herself a great deal of money, but was arrested again as Mrs. Stella Weber for operating another boarding house. She would slip out of town before going to trial or testifying in the Tufts case. She would never be heard from again, so the district attorney thought. It seems Brownie still kept in contact with her former girls, and the word got out that she had moved to New York, where she met an Oklahoma oil magnate. She quickly moved to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, with her oil producer, and acquired her own oil interests, vowing, "Brownie Kennedy won't come back." Although not present at the after-hours party, Fatty Arbuckle shared the blemish of that night in Woburn. In 1921, he was involved in a scandalous and criminal action involving the death of a beautiful starlet killed during a night of drinking. Fatty was implicated. His career plummeted. While eventually cleared, he never recovered, and his career as a headliner was over. For a short time in 1921, the Mishawum Manor would be converted into a new use. It would be occupied by graduates of technology who were studying at the Merrimack Chemical Company, but eventually it would be lost to development. New hotels and restaurants now occupy the area. The manor was located in the general area of the 99 restaurant on Mishawum Road. So when you were driving along Mishawum Road and bemoaned the traffic, the glut of industry and commercial properties, and longed for the quiet days of a time gone by when this area was secluded woodlands, remember the Mishawum Manor and that infamous day when Hollywood came to Woburn.